Every business operates within an internal and an external context. The internal context is made up of the business objectives and priorities of the organization, including how it wants to be perceived by its clients and the general public. The external context is made up of the legal and regulatory and competitive environments in which the business functions. The purpose of policies and rules is to ensure that employees work in a way consistent with and supportive of the business, as well as the regulatory and legal realities of the organization, that is, its context. When these rules and policies are not consistent with this context, or when the context is not fully understood by employees, it can have a negative, demoralizing effect on staff. The good manager ensures that staff are fully aware of and understand the business context, both internal and external, and how all the rules and policies are in support of that context. In this episode, we explore how to ensure that this alignment of rules and context can be implemented and maintained. Hi, I'm Rick Kendall.
And I'm Fred Ball.
Welcome to Management Mastery. The purpose of these podcasts is to share what each of us has learned about good and bad management in our combined over 40 years of experience, both as managers and executive coaches. During that time, we've coached managers at every level in companies from Fortune 100s to brand new startups in all major businesses, including nonprofits, government, and education. So whether you're just starting in your first management position or are an experienced manager looking to strengthen your management skills, we know our podcast will be valuable to you.
We just want to make a distinction between your operating style and the rules to run your business. The operating style, which we spoke about in March 14th, 2023 podcast, has to do with how you want to set the operating style for things like work as a team, treat each other with respect, trust one another, help and support each other. That's not what we're talking about here. Here we're talking about the rules to run your business, and we are discussing these rules.
Fred, I think it's important to point out here that by rules, we're referring to company-wide procedures and policies that must be followed. For example, you can't take gifts from a vendor, or the steps you have to take if you want to let someone go or hire someone, those kinds of things, rather than what you gave the example of how you want your department to run kind of atmospherically, if you will, how everybody should treat one another.
Nobody likes them, but everybody knows you need rules and policies to ensure that staff behaviors are consistent with and supportive of the priorities and objectives of the business. People want to know the reasons behind the rules and policies. That is, they want to know the business reasons for any rules they are being asked to follow. When employees don't see these reasons, rules can be seen as, and indeed sometimes are, arbitrary and unnecessary. In other words, unnecessary or poorly understood rules can be seen as oppressive, restrictive, and demotivating. When employees understand the business reasons for rules, they are much more willing to accept and abide by them.
Therefore, in order to motivate willing compliance with rules, it's important that employees understand the business context for those rules. And what this means practically is that the good manager needs to be sure that every staff person knows and understands the organization's business context, both the internal and external context.
Let's look a little bit more closely at the internal context. By that we mean the business objectives for the company, as well as the way in which the company wants to be perceived both as a corporate citizen and as an employer, so that its context is driven by its business goals as well as by the way it treats its employees and acts as a corporate citizen. I had a major client in New York who would tell its employees, you must follow the recommendations of the safety officer if the safety officer ever has anything to say. And sure enough, that safety officer, when the World Trade Center was about to be attacked, told the people in this company, get out. And the people in that company were able to get out because they knew in that case that that safety officer was there to watch out for their safety.
Wow. Yeah, that's a great example of that. Now the external context of a business has to do with both competitive realities as well as the regulatory and legal obligations for the company. And when these business realities or context are explained and understood by employees, then the rules and procedures that are based on these realities make sense and are seen as reasonable and worth following, just as in Fred's example there. If, however, an employee isn't aware of or doesn't understand the context, then the rules can be seen as arbitrary and repressive and demoralizing, and we all know that will engender a resistance. People don't like to be told just arbitrarily what to do, and so they'll push back and not do it. Again, that was not the case in Fred's example.
This is why it's important that new additions to the staff are thoroughly briefed on both the internal and external business context of the company and how the context is related to the policies and rules of the organization that apply to the employee. And when managers are busy, they sometimes don't spend enough time doing this with new staff members. And what happens is that the staff member then ends up having to learn the policies and rules from other folks in the department, and they sometimes get good information and sometimes not so good information.
Yeah, it's true. They become part of the background noise for the people who have been there because they understand them. And, it's like what they say about fish in water. They're not aware they're in water because that's all they know. I mean, and it's also important for both new and old staff people that these aspects of the business context are reviewed and discussed regularly with staff, especially if it seems like certain rules and policies aren't being adhered to. If you, as manager, if you get the sense that people have sort of drifted away from what they should be doing, you want to review the context and the rules in regard to the context. And in such meetings, there should be a free discussion about the context and the people's understanding of it and how it relates to the critical rules and policies. Because when you do this, you ensure that not only are the staff compliant with the rules and policies, but they're in agreement with the underlying logic and need for them. Thus, in these regulations, won't be seen as onerous and objectionable.
Whenever we deal with a CEO, they will often say to us, when I'm bringing in a new initiative, you cannot say it enough times. And if you do, someone will still come back to you and say, gee, I don't understand that. So you have to be prepared to discuss regularly with staff. A good way for you to ensure that staff are on board and in agreement with rules and policies is to publicly review them in a staff meeting, the current business context, both internal and external, along with all of the rules and policies that affect the staff and how they are driven by the business context.
And you should also welcome and discuss possible changes or eliminations of rules that may no longer be relevant. In other words, you're kind of re-examining everything regularly just to see if things have drifted out of relevance. And this type of discussion demonstrates that you're sensitive to the possible negative impacts that irrelevant or obsolete rules and policies can have on staff.
One of the things that we do when we're coaching an executive is that we will ask them, every 6 months, do you bring forward to your staff a review of the rules so that ones that are no longer necessary can be eliminated, or sometimes new ones have to be added. It's also important to remember that in this dynamic environment, business context can change. This means it's necessary to periodically review possible changes in the context with staff and make or recommend changes to the rules and policies as appropriate. Even when changes in the business context aren't evident, it's still wise to review all rules and policies as they pertain to the context to ensure that they're still relevant and meaningful. This is what I was talking about before when I said, do you review them every 6 months? Changes can occur suddenly that make a policy or a rule irrelevant or misdirected, and the sensitivity to this type of change goes a long way to preventing irrelevant or overly restrictive rules from staying in place.
Oh, that's so true, and it's important. And finally, a clear understanding of the context that rules and policies are responding to makes it possible to appropriately apply these rules and policies to any given situation. Now, this is important because one of the major causes of dissatisfaction among employees is when they feel that rules are being arbitrarily or overly rigidly applied. And when both the employee and the manager understand the underlying reason for a rule or policy, then it's much easier to be flexible in applying that rule, and so that it's consistent with the business context and not just an arbitrary mandate. And it's also, you want to be giving permission to employees to say, well, I don't understand why we have to do X, or I don't understand why we can't do Y. And it may be in an open, free discussion that you come to the conclusion, well, they make a good point. Maybe we don't have to do X or Y. So having that free discussion and making employees feel that they can raise those issues and push back on a rule or policy that they think is arbitrary, it gives you an opportunity, A, to show that you're flexible, and B, explain something they may be misunderstanding. So that kind of open conversation should be encouraged actively.
And it can work both ways. I just had a coaching situation where one of the manager's staff members thought that they understood a rule, and they overstepped that when they were dealing with someone else in the organization. And the manager ultimately had to sit down with them and say to them, look, in this case, you overstepped the authority that you had, and we need to bring that back into alignment. So it happens both ways. In the particular case that I'm talking about, the person had overstepped and the manager had to bring them back into alignment. In summary, in this episode, we discussed the importance of having a clear understanding of the underlying business context for rules and regulations in a company or department. Failure to have such an understanding can lead employees to feel that rules are arbitrarily overly restrictive and demoralizing. The wise manager reviews with their staffs the underlying business reasons for the rules and regulations and discusses whether they remain appropriate or not.
We hope you have found this podcast useful, and we'll come back again for more management mastery. If you have any comments about this or any of our episodes, or would like to find out more about our other services, including one-on-one coaching and group seminars for managers, visit our website at careercoachclass.com. Thanks for listening.